Two women were playing golf. One of the women hit the ball and watched in horror as her ball flew directly toward a foursome of men playing the next hole. The ball struck one of the men. He immediately clasped his hands over his groin, dropped to the ground, and rolled around in agony. The woman rushed over and said, "I'm so sorry." "Please, let me help. I'm a physical therapist, and I know I can relieve your pain if you'll let me." The man replied, "Oh no, I'll be fine in a few minutes." But he was clearly in agony, curled up in the fetal position and still holding his groin. At her insistence, he finally agreed. She gently moved his hands aside, loosened his pants, and placed her hands inside. She administered a tender and expert massage for half an hour and then asked, "How does that feel?" He replied, "It feels great, but I still think my thumb's broken." Betty went to the cemetery every day in her village to water the flowers on the grave of her deceased husband, Harry. When she was finished, she always walked backwards when leaving the grave. One day, her friend Layla asked, "Betty, why do you always leave the cemetery walking backwards?" Betty answered, "When Harry was alive, he always told me, 'You've got such a great ass, it could bring a dead man back to life.' I'm not taking any chance." An elderly couple was driving cross-country, taking in the views, bickering about directions, and loving retired life the only way they knew how. The wife was behind the wheel, steady and confident, with just a tiny lead foot. The husband sat beside her, offering helpful advice she never asked for. Then suddenly, flashing lights in the mirror. She pulled over, rolled down the window, and smiled sweetly as the officer approached. Officer: "Ma'am, do you realize you were speeding?" The wife, hard of hearing, turned to her husband. "What did he say?" He shouted, "He says you were speeding." The officer nodded. "Can I see your license?" Again she turned. "What did he say?" "He wants to see your license." She fished around in her purse and handed it over. The officer glanced at it and said, chuckling, "Oh, Arkansas. I used to spend some time there. Went on a blind date once with the ugliest woman I ever met." The wife looked at her husband again. "What did he say?" And the old man, without missing a beat, grinned and said, "He said he thinks he knows you." The officer had to walk back to his car because he was laughing so hard. No ticket was ever written. An unkempt teenager with his pants hanging half off his bottom walked into the local welfare office to pick up his welfare payment. He marched up to the counter and said, "Hi. You know, I just hate taking welfare. I'd really rather have a job. I don't like getting something for nothing." The social worker behind the counter said, "Your timing is perfect. We just got a job opening from a very wealthy man who wants a chauffeur and a bodyguard for his daughter. You'd drive her around in a new Mercedes-Benz and he'll provide all your clothes." The social worker continued, "Because of the long hours, meals will be included. You'll also get to accompany his daughter on her overseas trips and, well, she's in her mid-20s and can be a bit demanding. You'll need to keep her happy." The guy, wide-eyed, said, "You're kidding me." The social worker replied, "Yeah, well, you started it." A very nice, innocent Australian woman wanted to get married, but she was only willing to marry a man provided he had never had sex with another woman. After several unsuccessful years of searching, she decided to take out a personal ad. She ends up corresponding with Scotty Greer, who has lived his entire life in the Australian outback and has had no experience with women. They meet, and she likes him, with the feeling that they are perfect for each other. Finally, they got married. On their wedding night, she went into the bathroom to prepare for the evening, and when she returned to the bedroom, she found her new husband standing in the middle of the room, naked, with all the furniture from the room piled in one corner. "What happened?" she asked. "I've never been with a woman," he said, "but if it's anything like a kangaroo, I'm going to need all the room I can get." Grandpa tells his grandson, "All you kids do these days is play video games." When I was your age, he continued, my buddies and I went to Paris. We went to the Moulin Rouge, danced with a performer on stage, didn't pay for our drinks all night, and when the bartender complained, well, let's just say we taught him some respect. The grandson thinks his grandpa might be right, so he goes to Paris with his friends and visits the Moulin Rouge. 3 days later, he comes back with a broken arm and covered in bruises. Grandpa asks, "What on earth happened to you?" The grandson says, "I did just like you said, Grandpa." I went to the Moulin Rouge, danced with a performer, didn't pay for our drinks, and tried to teach the bartender some respect. But they beat me up and stole my wallet. Grandpa raises an eyebrow and says, "Well, who did you go with, boy?" The grandson replies, "My friends from school." "Who did you go with?" Grandpa grins and says, "Well, the 2nd SS Panzer Division." An elderly woman rushed to the pharmacy to pick up medication, but when she returned to her car, she realized she had locked her keys inside. Looking around, she spotted an old, rusty coat hanger on the ground. She picked it up and whispered, "Lord, I have no idea how to use this." So she bowed her head and prayed, "Please, God, send someone to help me." Just minutes later, a beat-up old motorcycle pulled into the lot. A bearded man in a biker skull rag got off and asked, "Need some help, ma'am?" She explained, "My daughter is sick. I've locked my keys in the car. I need to get home. Can you use this hanger to open it?" The biker smiled and said, "Sure." In less than a minute, her car was unlocked. Overcome with emotion, she hugged the man and cried, "Thank you, God, for sending me such a kind man." The biker chuckled and said, "Lady, I'm not a good man. I just got out of prison yesterday for car theft." The woman hugged him even tighter and sobbed, "Oh, thank you, God. You even sent me a professional." One night, I was about to propose to my girlfriend when my roommate Joseph barged into the room out of nowhere, tripped, fell over, and broke my glass table with his face. Totally ruined the mood. Now, I didn't know Joseph that well. I didn't even know where he was from. But since he was my roommate, I put my plans on hold to help him through his injuries. Joseph had gotten a big glass shard in his eye, making him completely blind in that eye. He had to go about his life with one of those cotton pads in his eyes for a couple of months. Then suddenly, he disappeared, along with my girlfriend. I later found out that they'd both bonded after his injuries and eloped together, leaving me behind without as much as a note. I tried to track both of them down, but never could. In conclusion, if it hadn't been for Cotton-Eyed Joe, I'd have been married a long time ago. "Where'd you come from? Where'd you go? Where'd you come from, Cotton-Eyed Joe?" The old lady was standing at the railing of the cruise ship, holding her hat on tight so that it would not blow off in the wind. A gentleman approached her and said, "Pardon me, madam. I do not intend to be forward, but did you know that your dress is blowing up in this high wind?" "Yes, I know," said the lady. "I need both hands to hold on to this hat." "But, madam, you must know that your privates are exposed," said the gentleman in earnest. The woman looked down, then back up at the man and replied, "Sir, anything you see down there is 85 years old. I just bought this hat yesterday." A writer died and was given the option of going to heaven or hell. She decided to check out each place first. As the writer descended into the fiery pits, she saw row upon row of writers chained to their desks in a steaming sweatshop. As they worked, they were repeatedly whipped with thorny lashes. "Oh my," said the writer, "let me see heaven now." A few moments later, as she ascended into heaven, she saw rows of writers chained to their desks in a steaming sweatshop. As they worked, they too were whipped with thorny lashes. "Wait a minute," said the writer. "This is just as bad as hell." "Oh no, it's not," replied an unseen voice. "Here, your work gets published." We went to see a movie the other night. I sat in an aisle seat as I usually do because it feels a little roomier. Just as the feature was about to start, a blonde from the center of the row got up and started working her way out. "Excuse me, sorry. Oops, excuse me, pardon me. Gotta hurry. Oops, excuse me." By the time she got to me, I was trying to look around her, and I was a little impatient, so I said, "Couldn't you have done this a little earlier?" "No," she said in a loud whisper. "The turn off your cell phone please message just flashed up on the screen and mine is in the car." A politician came to a small, rural Irish village just before an impending election and asks the town spokesman what their needs were. "We have two basic needs, sir. Firstly, we have a fine hospital here, but we have no doctor." On hearing this, the politician gets out his mobile phone and speaks into it for a few minutes, then states, "That's no problem. One will be here tomorrow." He then asks what their second problem was. "Well, sir, we need cell phone reception. There's absolutely no coverage in the whole of the village." An elderly couple walked by holding hands, and as they did, I jokingly told the gentleman, "Have her home by 10, with a smile and a wink. The old man stopped in his tracks, looked me dead in the eye, and without missing a beat said with a grin, "Don't worry, I will. Her husband gets home at 11. What? I laughed so hard I nearly fell over as they giggled and walked away. Moral of the story: never underestimate the wit of the older generation. They're still sharper than most of us. A man going on a business trip visits a witch doctor for his wife. He explains to the witch doctor that his wife has a very high sex drive and he wants to make sure she can satisfy herself while he's gone. No ordinary item will do. The witch doctor nods and says, "I have just the right thing." And he pulls out a box. "This is a voodoo dick. It is quite easy to use. Simply say voodoo dick and the part you want it to fuck, and it will start." So the man buys it and gifts it to his wife before going on his trip. The day after he's gone, the wife decides to try it out. She reads the instructions and says, "Voodoo dick, my vagina." And sure enough, the dick starts fucking her. It's great and keeps going for a long time. After she gets off, however, she realizes a problem. She doesn't know how to make it stop. The witch doctor's address is on the box, though, so she hops in her car and starts trying to drive there. All the while, the voodoo dick is still going at it. She's swerving on the road and ends up being pulled over. The police very sternly asks her, "Have you been drinking? You were all over the road." "No, officer," the wife replies. "It's this voodoo dick. It won't stop f***ing me." Clearly not believing her, the officer scoffs and says, "Voodoo dick my ass." A sweet old lady telephoned St. Joseph's Hospital. She timidly asked, "Is it possible to speak to someone who can tell me how a patient is doing?" The operator said, "I can. What's the name and room number?" The old lady in her weak voice said, "Norma Findley, room 302. The operator replied, "Let me place you on hold while I check with her nurse." After a few minutes, the operator returned to the phone and said, "Oh, I have good news. Her nurse just told me that Norma is doing very well. Her blood pressure is fine. Her blood work just came back as normal, and her physician, Dr. Cohen, has scheduled her to be discharged on Tuesday." The old lady said, "Thank you. That's wonderful. I was so worried. God bless you." The operator replied, "You're more than welcome." "Is Norma your daughter?" The grandmother said, "No, I'm Norma Findley in 302. No one tells me she..." The madam opened the brothel door in New York City and was greeted by a well-dressed, handsome man in his late 40s. "May I help you, sir?" she asked. "I want to see Rosie," he replied. She said, "Rosie is our most expensive lady. Perhaps you'd like to see someone else?" "No," he said. "I must see Rosie." Rosie appeared and told him, "I charge $10,000 a visit." Without hesitation, the man handed her the cash. They went upstairs. An hour later, he left. The next night he came back. Rosie was stunned. No one ever returned a second night at that price. Still, he paid and went upstairs with her. On the third night, he came again. Everyone was in shock. Again, he paid $10,000 and went upstairs. Afterwards, Rosie asked, "No one's ever done this. Where are you from?" He replied, "Brooklyn." She said, "No way! I have family in Brooklyn." "I know," he said. "Your sister passed away. I'm her lawyer. She asked me to deliver your $30,000 inheritance." A father decides to put his son in a music class. The teacher assigns him the tuba, and the dad goes home, leaving his kid there. When the child comes home, the dad asks, "What did you do today?" The child said, "I learned how to play the C note." The next day, the dad asks, "What did you do today?" The child said, "I learned how to play the G note." The next day, the dad asks, "What did you do today?" "I joined the orchestra." Two statues, one nude male, one nude female, sit beside each other at the entrance of Central Park. One day, very early in the morning, an angel comes down from heaven. He looks the statues up and down, and with a flick of his wrist, poof, he turns the statues into real people. The man and woman stare at each other in amazement, but their attention soon turns to the angel, who's quite satisfied with himself, grinning from ear to ear. He says to the couple, "You guys have been staring at each other while locked in stone for the last 100 years, completely unable to do a thing about your urges for each other." He pauses and then adds, "It's still pretty early, and people don't usually get to the park for another 30 minutes. You two should go into that covered area and, well, just have a good time." The man caught the eye of the woman, who had a twinkle in her eye and wore a mischievous grin. She bit her lip seductively, and with that the man grabbed her hand and the two ran off to the bushes. The angel then found himself privy to giggles, laughter, rustling, and squeals of delight. 15 minutes later, the couple emerged from the bushes hand in hand, out of breath and faces flush. The angel glanced at his watch. "You still have 15 minutes, you know. You can have another round if you'd like." The woman turned excitedly to the man and exclaimed, "Okay! But this time you have to hold the pigeon while I get to shit on its head." A Canadian family in the U.S. admitted their grandfather into a nursing home. After some time, they visit the old man and ask, "How do you feel here?" He replied, "It's wonderful. Everyone here is so courteous and respectful. There's a musician, 85 years old, who hasn't played the violin in 20 years, and everyone still calls him maestro. There is a judge, 95 years old, who hasn't been on the bench in 30 years, and everyone still calls him Your Honor. There's a dentist, 90 years old, hasn't fixed a tooth for 25 years, and everyone still calls him Doc. And then there's me. I haven't had in 35 years, yet they still call me the fucking Canadian." George comes home to his apartment, drunk as a skunk, and says to his roommate Ted, "I just visited Joe's Tavern. It's the best one I ever visited. It even had a solid gold toilet." "Cool," says Ted. He is so excited, he calls up Joe's Tavern. "My roommate told me all about your solid gold toilet," he says. "What?" sputters Joe the bartender on the other line. "We don't have a solid gold toilet." Ted hangs up the phone. "You must have been drunkenly mistaken," he says. "Joe's doesn't have a solid gold toilet." "It does so," responds George. "I'll prove it to you. I'll take you to Joe's tomorrow and show you myself." The next day, George brings Ted to Joe's. He is about to tell Ted where the toilet is when suddenly a voice is heard from the other end of the bar. "Hey, you! Aren't you the dickhead who took a shit in my tuba last night?" A party planner has organized a huge New Year's Eve party. At the last minute, the band he hired has to pull out because of a death in the family. The planner is totally stressed out because he has 500 partiers and no band. On December 30th, he contacts the only local band that was available, a duo consisting of an accordionist and a tuba player. He has hesitations, but he hires them so he will have live music. To his surprise, the duo is a huge hit with the crowd. The party was better than he ever imagined. After the party, he walks up to the band and says, "You know, I never thought in a million years that I would be saying this, but you two were great, and I would like to line you up now for next year." The duo replies, "Sure? Can we leave our stuff?" A man walks into a bar. He sits down at the counter and starts getting himself really good and drunk, like properly pissed. After a while, he feels a certain heaviness in his colon, so he calls over the bartender. "Excuse me," he asks blearily. "Where's the bathroom?" "Oh, it's right down the hall," the bartender replies. "Just take 2 lefts and a right, and you'll be right there." So the drunkard stumbles along, following the instructions as best he can in his current state, and lo and behold, he discovers a golden toilet. He's pretty impressed, but in his current state, he cares more about relieving himself, so he takes a shit and leaves for the night. The next night, the man returns to the bar. After an ill-advised series of alcoholic beverages, he finds he needs to go to the restroom again, and he can't remember where it is. "Could you tell me, where's the bathroom?" he asks the bartender. "Right down the hall, just take 2 lefts and a right," the bartender says. And so the drunk man discovers the golden toilet once again, relieves himself, and leaves to go home. The third night's going just like the last 2, but when the man goes down the hall, he finds the golden toilet's vanished. He hurries back to the bar. "What's happened to the golden toilet, bay?" he asks the bartender. "I swear it was right there." The bartender sizes the man up. You can almost hear the puzzle pieces clicking together in his head. Then he turns and shouts down the length of the bar, "Hey, Dave! I found the guy who's been shitting in the tuba."